Web applications, React. So, React was developed inside Facebook. 10 years ago, there was individual developers that thought that, hey, this is good, and then Facebook started to use React, and it was then open source in 2013. Basically, React is only front-end library, but it can be considered as a framework or such. It's getting more larger and popular all the time. And the aim of React is to provide an easy and fast way to build front-end user interfaces, what we are building here in this course, or also single-page apps, where you are just basically using a single page. And then you can also use React in mobile apps through this React Native. And even though React is used in the front end, the server side is still handled by, for example, Node.js and Express, which we have learned so far. And there are plenty of external packages to extend the features of React. So React is basically providing this working core, and then you use additional packages if you need some additional features. For example, you want to build some calendar on your website, then you just find a suitable calendar package, and then you have a calendar. React architecture is relying the use of JavaScript syntax extensions, JSX. Although you can work with JavaScript, it is basically always use this JSX. So developers can write basically HTML looking like code that has JavaScript inside it. There are a few differences. For example, you cannot use class keyword to define CSS class. You need to use class name. And also these tags, which are also components, need to be always closed. React is based on components, including other components that include other components. It can be thought that if we have a HTML page, we can have divs that have a h1 or other divs and p tags and then strong tags inside them or span. Similarly, React has components that have components inside them. And components can give props to other components. They are basically like parameters in functions, and these props is a sort of properties, but as these props can have properties, we are calling them props, because it would not sound that well if we are talking about properties that have properties. So you are giving and receiving props from components to another component. And this JSX, it needs to be compiled to JavaScript before browsers understand it. So browsers do not have understanding of JavaScript syntax extension, but when we are building React app, it's compiled and then it's seen well in browser environment. About these components, we have been building this Poem toilet wall application. If we would build it with React, we would have several components. For example, every poem could be one component, and they would be inside poems component that would be before the add poem component, and all these components would be inside the root app component. So everything is a component, but the React doesn't force you to use component always. You can have for loops instead of components, but usually you want to simplify your code that you build as small components as you have possibility. And if there is a reason to have a special functionality in some part of the application, then it's probably a new component. About installation, so there is a tool to install necessary packages and create a small React boilerplate application. So npx create React app, and you give just application name, then it will build you the necessary package and directory structure. So this is very similar to this Express generator. and React component. So we have been talking about component. What is really component? So component can be created with functions or with class keyword. Nowadays these arrow functions and arrow function syntax is shorter and it's more used. So here you can see that we are creating a poems component which is getting a props called. Actually we are destructuring the props and we are getting a poems out of that props. And then we are building this return clause that will have one div that has a header poems. We go through the poems array and we use and build another component poem, which is then in its own file, and we give this poem a key, so it's unique. And as a props to this poem component, we give a one poem. So this is the basic syntax how you create a component. So components need to have a key to individualize them so that React knows what component should be updated. So we can have, let's say, 8 poems, and then they all have the key, which in here would be the poem ID. It's a unique key, so if there is a reason to edit one poem, then React can understand that there is an ID, there is a key, and it can update only that part of the page. There is no reason to reload the whole page. Props can be given and received. Here poems is received, and then one poem is then given to the poem component. Let's have an example of this. So let's do some React coding, and let's start by creating this new template app. Let's go with React test, and this will take some time. There are plenty of things to install. It will generate something like 50 megabytes of code and node modules, etc. And now we have the app, so we can go to the React app dir and we can start the code. Visual Studio Code here, and let's get the browser. Now we have a browser and we'll have a terminal. Let's start the React server. Yep. Localhost 3000, and now we have the application up and running there. So let's go and see what we have here. We have the package.json, which gives us that we have dependencies like React, React DOM, React scripts, and Web Vitals. And then we have the scripts we can start, we can build, or we can test and eject the project. So if you are deploying the project in a product environment, you need to build it first, so then it will be faster, etc. Then there is this public folder, and there is a index.html where your project is about to start here, and then we have the app.js, which is the starting point of this app. And now this is generating us this logo here. We have the logo here, and we can get rid of this right now. We don't need any of these. Now we remove it and save the file, and now we got automatically the page was updated and we got blank page. Now we don't have anything here, and we can get rid of this. We can still have this CSS file, although we don't need that in a sense, but if we would like to have some CSS file, we could have that. And now our task is to build a just simple React app to describe what is React. And we start this by designing that we would like to have these poems, and we would like to have some kind of a form that we could add new poems to the web page. So something similar we have been building before. Let's first create a folder called components, and inside this folder we will create a file called poems.js. And now I have installed plugin which is this. It gives us some beneficial commands which will generate code. We don't need to write it manually, we can just use these short commands to generate, and we will use one of these commands to get us simple like this, not like this, like this, and we don't actually need this line here. So it will generate automatically this component based on the file we have here. So we have a poems.js, then generate us a component poems, and this is a arrow function. So we are basically creating a function called poems, but it's in React, it's a component that we have. And now in the app.js we need to use this import that component. So import poems from components / poems. So now we have the poems, it's defined but it's never used, so let's use it. And let's add poems here. Now we have poems. So now the component is used. This looks like HTML, but it's not. It's a React component. And about this props, so let's give a keyword which is going to be something like this. It's going to be something like this, and of course it needs to be, so we are giving a prop which is a object text that has a foo. And if we go to the poems component, we can use this as a, let's build an h1 I would like to have, thanks. Yeah, and then we can have these props. We don't need this keyword props dot keyword dot text. Now we got the foo here. So we are providing props keyword to the poems component, and then there is an object inside this props. So then we can use it in a component. And we have now props here. We could just destructure these props. Just we would like to have only the keyword. And now we have only the keyword. We don't need that props anymore. So now we can get the text to be shown here. So this is how we are building a component and providing data to this component. So now we would like to have some basic poems, and so I will just copy paste this data here, and we are just also using here now we have a poems is the variable that will have an array of poem objects. We are using this use state, so we can modify this array with this set poems function, which is then used to modify these poems. But now we can start that we have these poems, so we can provide this poems component, these poems. So in this, and we need to import, of course, this use state. And We could get a lot from React, but we are now only getting use state. We are destructuring this React, and we are getting only use state part because that is what we are using here. And now we are providing this poems array to this poems component. So we are using this JSX. So it looks like HTML, but it's in the end it's JavaScript with HTML. So we can provide some variables within these curly brackets. And now we have the poems part. So we are getting not keywords but poems. And now the keyword is not defined. We can just give here a title, poems. This is just HTML. And then we would like to go through those poems and provide every poem as a new poem component. So let's add a poem component here. This one. So now we have the poem component, and it's a div too. So these are pretty much same. Now we want to get a poem here, just one poem, and then we would like to show that poem. So basically it's enough that we have a p element here, and then we are providing just the poem. But as we can see that this poem variable has these elements inside fields, so we will need to have this poem from there. So poem like this. And now we need to have a way here to go through this array and then add all those poems to this poem component. So we have the poems prop, and let's go through that with this map. And now we are using this poem component, and we will have a lot of poems, so we need to have some kind of a key to tell the React that this is individual poem. So we can use this poem.id, and then we can give this individual poem as a props. And we need to close this tag like this. So poem is not defined. Of course it's not defined. We have not been including it here. So let's import it. And this time this poem.js is in the same folder. We don't need to use the component there. And now we got all the poems in the web page. So this is extremely simple to use React to build this kind of a application. So we have some data, and then we are using that data and we are dividing it to individual poem elements. And not bad. But let's continue. Let's do some JS here. So let's give it a margin auto and max width 600 pixels. Let's see if this is now, it's a bit better. And we could actually get rid of this. Now it's like that. And then we will need to build the form that we could add new poems. Let's add a form here. So we are creating once again a new component, add poem. And we are we can actually, let's first build it. So now we don't have the component yet. Let's add it, add poem.js. Now it's there, and we need to of course get it in use. let's import it. And now we can use this add poem to build our form. So what we need in our form is the actual form. And then in the form there will be a few components. Label poem. And input. We can give some placeholder. Add poem. And then it's like this. Actually, we could have a text area, of course, here, not just like this. Now we have a label and the text area, and then let's have the VIP part there. So let's build label. And now we cannot use the for that was in HTML, but we can actually, let's use for, and we would like to have this for the VIP, and then we will have the input element ID VIP name equals VIP type equals checkbox. Let's do some checkbox, and then this is okay. So now if we now save this, and we didn't get any errors, but this is not right, it won't work. We will soon probably see that. And then we will need to have some kind of a input which has type of submit. Like this. And now we could actually add some materialized CSS here. So let's copy paste these library links here. So we are getting a bit nicer. Now we don't need those files anymore, and we don't need those. And let's get back to this add poem part. So there is no this VIP element. Now we need to add some span here. And we got generated 2 spans. Now we have the very important element and everything. So something needs to be done when this add poem is added and this button is pressed. So let's have first here on submit. What we are calling is on submit, and let's then add the function here. And we will have some kind of an event that is happening when we are pressing that button. And first of all, we want to prevent this default, so we are not sending anything to the server like this. And now we would like to have a states for these elements, so this checkbox and this text area. Similarly, that we have here a state for this poems array, we will need to have a state for these 2 elements. So let's build them. So the first one is called text, and we will have a method set text that will modify the variable, and we are using state not like this. And we need to import, of course, this Nope. Like this. And now we have a text and set text, which are never used, but they will. And also this VIP, very similar. And this is not a string, it's a boolean, so the default can be false. And there is a missing like this. Yeah, and to be able to modify, to link this text to this text area, we will need to have here that on change. So when it's changing, we are doing something. We are providing an array function that sets text. So we are now updating this text element. And we will have the text available here on the event target value. And then we will still add here that the value of this element is text. And now we are something we are missing. Yeah, we are missing. Now it's correct. So actually we will have I have installed this React tool so we can check the components here. So actually we will have a components here, and then there is also profiler that's provided by this Chrome plugin. But with these components, the React tells what kind of components we have here. And here in @poem we will have state hooks, and they are now, this is now empty, and this state is false here. And now it's not false anymore, as I am not empty, as I am writing text here. So we can get that this text variable has this text now, and this is not yet working. We will need to add that. So very similar to this input element, we will do this on change. We will have some arrow function that plays with this event. So this checkbox has this current target dot checked, which is giving the correct value for us. And then we can provide also that value. Now let's put this checked to VIP like this. So now we can set that if we are pressing here, this variable here also moves to true or false depending on what's the status of this checkbox. So now we can play around with this. So then we could go with this on submit. So we are pressing on submit now, nothing happens. But we would like to have some kind of a some kind of a method that we would add that new data to our poems array here. But first we can set that if we are submitting something, we set text to be empty. So we are emptying these values, and then set VIP to false. Let's see if this works. Yes. Now if I'm pressing this, this will be nullified. So we do not need to use any JavaScript command to get element by ID, this input element and this checkbox and this text array and this checkbox. But we can just use these methods, and React will automatically map the values to the HTML element that are visible in the browser. So then we need some kind of a way to add these values to this array. So let's add a function here called add poem, and this function is getting poem, and we could actually let's not log it. What we need, we are still missing the ID. Let's just generate some random pseudo random ID. So now we are getting a random number. Of course, if this would be a real life application, we would use the UID package that would provide us better ways to generate IDs. Or if we would use a backend that would have a MongoDB, the MongoDB would automatically generate the ID. And then let's build a new poem, which is an object. So these are all objects, and it will have this ID, and then besides this ID it will have all that is in this poem element, which we are providing soon. And then we can just set poems that we will have array, which will have all the poems that all are there, and then this new poem. So this syntax just uses all the existing ones, and then we are adding a new one there, and this is using this ID and then adding everything that is in this poem that is from the form. And now we have the function, but we need to use the function here. So let's use the props way to do it. So on add, let's give it this function there. So add poem, and let's get back to here. We are getting the poem. We are not getting the poem. We are getting the on add function. And now we can use this function, what we just got, and we need to add poem, and this poem should have this actual poem in the variable called poem, so not text, so we need to provide it as a poem that has text. And then the second variable is this VIP, which is in VIP variable. Let's see. Yes, it's working. We are getting new poems here. And what we are not seeing is the very important poems. They should be bolded here. So let's modify this our poem a little bit so that we would have a. This should provide us an error. So poem VIP, if that's true, we will provide a class called VIP, and otherwise we will do nothing. This should not work, and it's not working. Let's see. True. Yeah, this first one. So this is not compatible with JSX, so we would like to have this as a class name. And now it should work, but it's not working. Of course it's not working, we have not the VIP class at all. So let's add this VIP class. Strongest possible. Now we got it. So if we now remove this, it should not work. We should have been using this class name, and similarly here we should use for HTML. The React should mention that. Actually, I don't know why it's not mentioning right now that they should be for name and class name. But now we have a fully functioning application. We can add poems, which are small or big, and they can be important or not important. So this is pretty much the basics of React. So we have two things. Actually, we have three things. We have components like poems. Then we have props that we are using to modify the inside part of the component. And the third part is this, we have functions that we are giving as a props to some components, and then they can use those functions to do things. So this is pretty much how React works. So as a conclusion, React is very popular front-end library. It's nowadays used basically everywhere. It uses this JSX, which looks like HTML and JS. And one develops components and functions to play with them. And the backend is still built with Node.js or other similar tool.